All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Town Hall. Today is Tuesday, October 21. We're here for a work session to discuss the potential homestead exemption program. First order of business, as always, the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next on the agenda is the land acknowledgement statement. The town of South Kingstown pays homage to the indigenous people and land in which the town is now located. But this acknowledgement serves as a reminder of our ongoing efforts to recognize, honor, reconcile, and partner with the Narragansett tribe, whose land and water we benefit from today. All right, we're now going to jump right into it. I'm going to hand it over to Town Manager Jim Manning for an introduction.
Good evening. Thank you. As you stated, tonight is a long-awaited homestead exemption work session that we've been working on and talking about for quite a while and working on for about the same time frame. Before I begin the formal presentation, there's 5 people that were instrumental in getting all the data and getting it all together. They've worked anywhere from minimum of 2 hours to 4 hours every day for the past month getting this stuff done. It's Brian Sylvia in the finance part of this, Wendy Duarte, who's handling the tax assessors part of it, which is a big part. Jamie Gorman, who's about enforcement. Jamie Rabbit, giving us guidance and his technical ability to put this together. And Jess Spence, who's revised this report, I think, 10 times just today, right? So, literally. So, but let's begin, and we'll go to page 2, Jess. So I'm going to read this because there's probably a lot of people at home that are watching this, and they won't be able to read that in the time frame that I'll get through. But I'll read it, and then it'll go much quicker. There's about 27 pages in this presentation. Some will go very quick. So what I'm doing is my goal is to lead you down a path, how we got here, why we got here, how we got here, and where we go from here. So if you look, this is the enabling legislation for the town of South Kingstown. It was enacted April 18, 2025, became effective December 31st, 2025. And I'll get into why this is needed. Enabling legislation is required to have a homestead, or to consider a homestead. The town council of the town of South Kingstown is authorized to annually fix the amount, if any, of a homestead exemption with respect to assessed value from local taxation on taxable real property used for residential purposes or mixed-use purposes, defined as a combination of residential and commercial uses. In the town of South Kingstown, aim to grant homestead exemptions to the owner or owners of residential real estate or a combination residential and commercial real estate in an amount not to exceed 10% of the assessed value. So that's bullet point 1. That's the key point. Up to 10% is allowed under this enabling legislation. Bullet 2, the exemption shall apply to property used exclusively for residential purposes and improved with a dwelling containing less than 5 units, or real property used for a combination of residential and commercial uses. Bullet number 3, when real property is used for mixed purposes, the percentage of the assessed value shall be a prorated amount. Number 4, the prorated amount shall be the percentage of square feet of the parcel used for residential purpose, multiplied by the percentage of the homestead exemption in order to determine compliance with the homestead exemption as outlined in this section. The town council shall provide, by resolution or ordinance, rules and regulations governing eligibility for the exemption established in this section. The last part of this slide. In the event the property is granted an exemption under this section, is sold or transferred during the year for which the exemption is claimed, the town council of the town of South Kingstown, upon approval of the town council, may provide for a proration of the homestead exemption in cases where title to property passes from those not entitled to claim an exemption to those who are entitled to claim an exemption. We'll go to page 3, please. So what is a homestead exemption? So Rhode Island general law does not provide a definition for homestead exemption. But generally, a homestead exemption is defined like this. Typically, a homestead exemption provides tax relief for property that is owner occupied. And that's the definition we will be using tonight. What is the process for implementing a homestead exemption? We just went over the biggest part. A city or town in Rhode Island must receive authorization in the form of enabling legislation from the General Assembly before enacting a homestead exemption. And that's what I read to you on the first slide. The second step is enacting an ordinance that specifies the rules and regulations governing eligibility for the exemption. Typically, the homestead exemption would take effect on the first assessment date after the ordinance is enacted. For example, if the General Assembly enacts enabling legislation in 2026 and the town adopts an ordinance in the same year, the exemption would take effect on December 31st, 2026. So the tax bills issued in 2027 would reflect the homestead exemption. There are 11 communities, cities, or towns that have homestead exemptions. Bristol, Central Falls, East Providence, Johnston, Lincoln, Narragansett, New Shoreham, North Kingstown, North Providence, West Greenwich, and Woonsocket. There are 6 communities, cities or towns, that have tiered residential tax rates. The tiered rate, for those listening, is a separate rate from the other. So it would be one at one rate, one at another. So the tiered residential tax rates are also apply in Cranston, Middletown, Newport, Pawtucket, Providence, West Warwick. Page 5. Possible homestead exemption is based on a certified 2025 tax roll, which is the year end December 31st, 2025. Calculations will change once the town reconciles the 2024 statistical revaluation. Currently, the town is working on the 2026 roll, which will be certified on June 15, 2026, the year end December 31st, 2025. So how could that change? So Wendy gave me an explanation today that it could change from appeals, from the review board, and so forth. So it will not be certified until the date I just gave you. Page 6. Let's go by the numbers. There are the total number of properties on our tax roll of 14,302. If you look down, the single-family owner-occupied homes are 7,443, which is 52% of the total number from 14,302. So about half of that number of properties on the tax roll are owner-occupied single-family. Single-family non-owner-occupied are 1,831, which reflects 13% of that top number I gave you. So the total single-family is 9,274, or 65% of the total number of properties on the tax roll. Then we have all other properties. And all of the properties are commercial, two-family, estate, farm, seasonal, other improved land, residential, vacant other, residential on leased land, residential condominium, documiniums, farm forest, open space, and mobile homes. So let's get into the number that's not on here, which is going to be very pivotal to your decision on if this town can do a homestead exemption. So there are 9,274 single-family homes. The owner-occupied are 7,443. So if you divide those two numbers, you come out to 80% of the homes in this town are possibly single-family owner-occupied. That would be the number that would qualify for a homestead. Now, how do we come up with that number? So Wendy was able to to research how many tax bills for single-family homes go to the address of where the property is located. So an assumption is being made that the tax bills are going there because the person lives there. And we are considering it's a high probability that that is accurate. But if you go to the next part, which is single-family non-owner occupied, 1,831. Once again, it's divided into that 9,274. That's about 20%. So we are going off the assumption when we did these calculations that approximately 80% of the town is single-family owner-occupied when it comes to single-family homes, and non-owner occupied is approximately 20%. And you'll see a pie chart off on the right that has some breakdown. Similar, it's just showing what I just said. Page 7, please. Let's break it down even further. The total number of properties unattachable, as we stated in the last slide, is 14,302 properties total. The total number of tax-exempt properties are 709, which means the total number of taxable properties, which is our tax base, is 13,593. Let's go over the assessed values of these homes as we scroll down on this page. All single-family properties, that number that I gave of, let me just go back to that last slide, 9,274. If you use that number, all those properties are valued at $4,916,043,690. That's the number that we use to calculate. Those are the assessments of all single-family properties. All other properties, minus the tax exempt, and I defined all other properties a few minutes ago, $3,916,779,231. So the subtotal of what we, on our tax roll, what we can tax as our tax base is the next line, $8,832,822,921. And you'll see the personal exemptions below it of $133,073,328. The total gross assessed value for all properties is $8,965,896,249. Once again, I'm leading you down a path so you can see where and if we could go through a homestead, who would be affected and by how much. So we can keep referring back to these numbers or slides if you like when the time comes. Let's go to page 8, please. Because there was enabling legislation to go to up to 10%, the question always comes, and there's an expectation sometimes that we could immediately go right to 10%. We're going to give you numbers to show if that is possible and how we calculated this. So this slide's pretty important. The estimated tax rate, if 10% homestead exemption is enacted, we'll go over these numbers. In 2025, our current tax rate is $8.94 per $1,000 of assessed value. The red bullet. If we provided a homestead exemption to that 7,443, I think was the number, there'd be a shortfall of $4,394,943 that we would have to make up somewhere. Because if you're giving 10% exemption to the people that are eligible, that is the shortfall. That is the amount we'd have to make up somewhere. 4.4 million, basically. The estimated increase to the tax rate of 54 cents per thousand for all taxpayers. And I'll get into that. That's be a little tough to follow, but I'll explain it. So therefore, the estimated new tax rate would be $9.48 per $1,000 of assessment for all taxpayers. So basically, you would need to increase the entire tax rate for everyone so that you could decrease for the homestead exemption by 10% for that 7,443 homes. So it goes up, and then it would come down over here. Let's continue with a possible impact. Page 9. The impact of a 10% homestead exemption. The residential and commercial properties would need to have a rate increase of 6.04% to cover the 7,443 single-family residents who would be eligible for a 10% homestead exemption. So I'll explain this like I did the last slide, but this one's even a little more clear. If you look on the left, the green, a 10% homestead exemption for those who qualify would result in a 3.96% actual tax savings to them. And you look at the shift next to it, to the right, a 10% homestead exemption for all other residential and commercial properties would result in a 6.04% actual tax increase. So once again, let's go over those numbers in case there's any confusion. So because you're raising everyone in town, single family, commercial, that entire number of that, approximately 14,000 on the tax roll, you'd have to go up 6.04% on everyone so that you could give a 10% homestead exemption to the other column, 7,443 people that would qualify under the assumptions we have. So really, that you're doing a homestead exemption, but the people who are attaining who are qualified to get it is only 3.96%. That is because we have such a large percentage of the town as owner-occupied resident, 80%. I use this term, the larger the pool that we cast, the less impact it would have on the people eligible. You need a narrow group of people that could be eligible for homestead. That's where you get the best bang for the buck. Once again, Lock Island has maybe a 20% owner-occupied resident. Narragansett has maybe 30%. So it's easier for them to do it because it can be offset by non-residents. Let's go to page 10. The total tax levy in this town is $79,178,696. Single-family homes represent $71,927,793, or 91% of the total tax levy. So you can see that single-family homes are the largest driver in our total tax levy. The residential tax revenue would decrease due to a homestead exemption by about $315,000, and it would increase to the commercial tax revenue by $370,000. So why is that? Not only are you giving that group of people 7,443 homes a homestead exemption, but you're losing revenue because their assessed values went down. So we're going to be taking in less money in the tax levy because of that, because it's 80% of single-family homes will be getting a homestead, which brings the assessments down by 10%. And that shift would have to go to the commercial tax revenue if the homestead exemption under this model. There's other models I'll be showing you. Let's go to page 11. The single-family median assessed value, 10% homestead impact. So there are 4,000. So we have to give you a baseline of what a homeowner could expect. And so let's use the single-family home below a median assessed value. So let's use that as an example. There are 4,637 single-family homes in this town at or below the median assessed value. If you look at the left, far left, the median single-family home assessed value in 2025 was $586,350. The current tax bill on that median single-family home this year is $5,241.97. So look on the far right. The resident owner occupied, not the far right, the second from the far right. Go right to the bottom. The total savings for a median assessed valued home average would be about $239 per year. But the transfer of that loss of tax revenue in red at the bottom, the $4.4 million, would translate to a total increase of $316 per year for a non-resident owner-occupied person who owns an assessed value of $586,350. Page 12. This looks like a very complicated slide, but it really just flows down to the numbers we just spoke about. The adopted final net levy to support the operating budget in fiscal year 25-26 was $79,000,000, approximately $200,000, $79.2 million. The adopted tax, the next line, dark blue, adopted net tax levy increase was 3.28% last year. The adopted tax rate to support the operating budget was $8.94. If you enact a 10% homestead exemption, there's a loss of revenue of $4,394,000. The projected tax levy to support a homestead exemption would be $79,233,000, which would projected net tax levy increase to support a homestead exemption would be a 0.07% increase. Therefore, the projected tax rate to support a homestead exemption at that 10% rate is $9.48, which you look at the next line, which we stated was a 6.04% increase. Last year, we had approximately $2.5 million increase in operational costs in our operating budget. Correct, Brian? Let's just hold that steady. Let's just say we have that same operational cost increase. Now, this is for salaries, price of asphalt, price of chemicals, everything needed to run the town. The projected net tax levy to support a homestead exemption operating cost increases to $81,705,000. The projected net tax levy increase to support a homestead exemption in operational costs is 3.19%. The projected tax rate to support a homestead exemption and operational costs would be $9.78 as the tax rate. Projected tax rate increase to support a homestead exemption and operational cost expenses would be 9.4%, which increased from $8,094. So it'd be a 9.40% increase. You can see that's pretty sobering, seeing all those statistics. So let's look at alternative options to a 10% homestead exemption. Option 1, lower the homestead exemption from 10% to 5% as a base of measurement. If you look at slide 15, let's go right to the bottom and just look at that red. You've cut automatically by going from 10% to 5%, you've cut the loss of tax revenue in half. So you'd be at about $2.2 million tax revenue that would have to be shifted somewhere else. Once again, we're using a median single-family home assessed value of $586,350. Go to the far right. The resident owner occupied, I'll go right to the bottom, would have a total savings on a 5% homestead exemption of $117 per year. But the non-resident owner occupied, the total increase would be $152 a year. The question I asked Ryan today was, why is that number not even? And the answer is because it's an 80-20 split. That's why. It's not a 50-50 split. It's an 80-20 split. So there's less properties to increase to make up that $2.2 million. So that was option one, 10% to 5%. Let's go to page 16. I'm not going to read every number there, but let's leave it up for a few minutes so you can see and compare the 10% to 5% to see if that is an option you're willing to explore. The bottom line is it goes up, but it's not at that 9% number in the bottom corner. It goes to 6% increase. We're definitely going to have some operational cost increases, and we're only using the number we used last year as a baseline. Let's go to option two, expand and increase personal exemptions. Currently, we give approximately $133 million in exemption value decrease to several classes of residents in this town. Let's go to page 19. Accessory dwelling units. This one, this town gives a 5-year exemption for ADUs as a tax credit for a 5-year period, which is a loss of revenue of about $30,371 if you look on the top middle right. So we give a total tax credit of $30,371. If you look at below that, a flat exemption for eligible legally blind residents. We give $426 per exemption. There are about 20 claimed, and that is $8,520. I'm sorry, $8,520 that we give as a total tax credit. Let's go to page 20. The elderly exemption. This is income-based, and you can see the slide right here. Goes the most you could get is $2,472 based on income, your income, which is 0 to $23,700. So the least amount you would get back would, if you look at the bottom line, is $534 as the least amount you could get on a income-based exemption. So an option here is to increase the income level that a person can make and still get an exemption, or increase the exemption altogether. Just an option. Page 21, we have veterans exemptions that total $186,348. Veterans of war, $215 exemption. We have 620 of those in town. Unmarried spouse of veteran of war, $215. We have 158 of those. 100% disabled veteran. We have 55 of those. The exemption is $340. A Gold Star parent, we have one, $378 exemption. So once again, the total exemptions are $186,348. Option 3. So this is a flat rate, resident owner occupied, medium flat rate homestead examples. That's the median home value. So what does this mean before I even read it? So we're going to give you statistics that go from 10,000 to 200,000 of an exempted amount, which means, look at the far left, the $10,000 amount. That means that everyone who qualified under this model for a homestead exemption would be given a $10,000 exemption on the property value of their home. What would that translate to? $43.29 savings per year. So that means whatever your house is worth, it's $1 million, $500,000, $3 million, the first $10,000 of your assessed value is taken off, so you get a $10,000 exemption. In the red on the bottom, that's the total tax revenue loss if we follow that model. So on a $10,000 tax exemption, we'd have to make up $665,000. Spread that out. You can follow that all the way across. 10,000, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100,000, 150, 200,000. You can see where the savings would be for any person getting a homestead exemption and what the tax revenue loss would be for that we would have to pass on to the remaining 20% of the town. Page 24. This slide pertains to the non-resident. So the last slide is what the residents would save. The next slide would be the projection of what the non-resident owner-occupied median-priced home would have to pay, what their increase would be. So go right to the bottom, look at the increase on each exemption. If you chose to do it, it's in red. Page 25, we're almost done with my presentation. There are possible additional options you could add or subtract to any homestead exemption. It could be income-based. It could be tiered tax rate. You could have two tax rates for a resident versus a non-resident. 3, you could have a tiered tax rate, a resident. 3 tiered tax rate, resident, non-resident, commercial. Let's go over the eligibility requirements, page 26, to qualify for an annual homestead exemption. 1, the owner must apply annually between January 1st to May 1st. 2, the owner must hold title to the property as of December 31st and reside at the property for at least 6 months plus 1 day of the year. 3, the owner cannot rent any portion of their single-family home. 4, neither the owner-occupied applicant nor spouse is receiving an owner-occupied rate or homestead exemption or other personal exemption for another piece of property located elsewhere in the state of Rhode Island or any other state in the United States for that same period of time that the owner is seeking an owner-occupied rate for property in South Kingstown, unless during that time the owner is either legally separated or divorced. So what does that mean? That means you can't have 2 homestead exemptions, one here and one in Florida. Pick which one you're gonna choose to take. How does a person prove that they qualify for a homestead exemption? These are the 5 things at the bottom. The owner must supply proof of residency through 3 of the following: voter registration here in town, state tax rate return with an address in town, federal tax rate return, address in town, a Rhode Island driver's license or state ID from the state of Rhode Island with an address in town, or a motor vehicle registration that comes back to this town. The last slide. If we do a homestead exemption, what would be the administrative costs approximately to run a program? There are going to be administrative costs. If you have 7,443 properties, as an example, someone has to verify that all those 5 things that went over in the last slide yearly. Every town that has a homestead has administrative staff that run that program. So you'd have to put a clerk in that position. You'd have to hire a clerk. Clerks make $50,000 to $60,000, plus you have you know, you have the full benefit package, pension, all that other stuff, comes out to approximately $90,000. You'd have to have new or updated software programs, which could help in running the program. Some towns do it manually. Then the other thing is it's a minor expense, but it's office equipment for a new clerk. But we did all the research. This is what it would truly cost, between $125,000, $155,000 to administer a homestead ordinance. I'm sure you have questions, and we're available to take any questions you have.
Thank you, Jim. Any questions? I can throw some to start it off. All right. Jim, I want to dive into, I think an easy one to talk about here is option 2, some of the personal exemptions we already have.
Yes, Mr. President, what page are you on, please?
I believe it starts page 18.
Okay. Yes.
Starts 18, goes in 19. Anyway, we have a number of them here, one of which accessory dwelling unit, exemption for legally blind residents, income-based exemption for elderly residents, and flat exemption for eligible veterans and family. Do we know the last time these have been increased?
A few years ago, 2022, so we're probably due for a discussion on increasing those numbers due to COLA or HUD, and I do have that with me if you'd like to talk about that.
Do we know what the, I guess, annual increase would be if we had increased it the same amount of inflation for each year since the last time we updated it? Do we know what that increase would be?
Do you mean for 23 and 24 since we technically missed the increase?
Exactly, yes. I guess what I'm getting at is if we didn't take up an increase in those years, we should account for that if we're going to increase it this year.
Bear with me one moment. I'm just reading something that I had given you all probably about a month or so ago when I had done a deep dive on these, and I'll be honest, I'm now in like homestead world, so it's a little rusty, so bear with me. But I did write then for consideration that the Social Security cost of living adjustment, which we call COLA, for 2026 will be around 2.6 to 2.7%. We base that on the Consumer Price Index. COLA in 2025 was 2.5. COLA is directly tied to the rate of inflation. The Social Security Administration, the SSA, typically announces the official COLA for the following year during the second week of October. So I can get that number for you. I don't have that right now. And then HUD has also announced 2025 adjustments with an average increase of 4.6. So you'd probably want to go with something in the range of 10%. I mean, it's up to you, but I believe we did that last time in 2022. We hadn't done it in a few years, so it seems like every 2-3 years we do bring that up.
Okay. And if we do increase it by an amount, let's just estimate 10%. Obviously, that'll increase the person's eligible, at least relating to the elderly income exemption.
Correct. So that $133 million, even if, let's just say homestead was on the table, we were having a discussion about personal exemptions, I think that was on the table anyway to go over that top tier threshold. So the cutoff basically for the income is $45,197. So as you may want to consider increasing the level where you have the cutoff, and then within the tiers, how much you want to give the resident that's in need. And I'm going based on memory, but I think when we did this in 22, we did collapse some of the brackets, and that's why I think it's important to note the count. You have much more people in that lower bracket that are need-based, so that's something to take into account.
And the last time we updated, you said 2022. Is that for all of these exemptions or just the income-based one?
All of them. We need to do a review.
All right. Just, I think that seems to be an obvious one to address. We definitely should do a better job at looking at these annually, adjusting for inflation. The fact that we missed a few years at times when there's been a lot of inflation is not ideal. So we'd like to allow the max number of persons who can be eligible, get into this program and not exclude anyone who's sort of just above it by way of income that is just surpassing the amount we haven't updated in a few years. So I definitely believe we should look at this aspect and update all these.
Go ahead.
I've got a few questions. I'm not sure whether it's Jim or Mike. To start with, in terms of the basis for the calculations that you've got here, the assumption is if the tax bill went to the address that's being taxed, you're considering it owner occupied.
That's an assumption we're making, yes.
All right. And just so everybody's on the same page, that would give us the largest possible universe of people potentially eligible for the exemption.
It so happens it does. It's nearly 80%.
Right, but that 80% is based on the assumption that
Yes.
they are, in fact, going to be eligible as owner-occupied.
Yes.
It may not be the case, and they're going to have to come in if we enact this. They're going to have to come in
Yes.
and submit the paperwork to demonstrate that they are, in fact, owner-occupied. Mike, I don't know how other cities and towns do this. My own experience has been Warwick has one system, Narragansett has another, and I think Newport also has this issue. When title is held by an REIT or a trust, are they considered eligible for the homestead exemption? Or an LLC even?
Yeah, so, it depends.
Okay.
Because it may trusts are a lot easier. A lot of people put their homes in trust. Many people in South Kingstown have their homes in trust. So that's, in my mind, that's an easy one. They qualify if they're in a trust. A REIT is usually an investor.
Right.
So I'd be very surprised if a REIT would be owner-occupied. Basically, as you said, towns use various methods to determine if you're owner-occupied. Things like voter registration status, what your Rhode Island driver's license says, etc. What we usually do is put in some criteria that the assessor can use, but it's not all-inclusive. And we also throw in a catchphrase, and or any other criteria that the assessor deems reasonable, because for a renter, they may have different, meaning you rent your space, but you're a resident. The reason you see different criteria is for that reason.
Okay. Another question, again, on the basics before we get into the details. On page 9 and page 12, the scenarios you were running had a calculation of a tax increase with the exemption of 6.04%. How does that play into the state cap of 4% in a year?
I'll let Brian answer that. We did address that in our discussions, but I'll let Brian answer that question.
So, how the homestead would work, if enacted, the properties would be exempted, and the rate would go up to offset that revenue. So the goal would be to be revenue neutral through the homestead exemption. So the rate would be going up 6.04%, but you saw a levy increase of 0.07%, a very small levy increase. And that 0.07% levy increase is associated with the fact that for every 1 cent of the tax rate is about $80,000, and you're just not going to hit right on there. So
the state's mandated 4% cap is on the levy, not on the tax rate?
That's correct.
Okay.
Jim. So on page 6, we have single-family non-occupied or non-owner occupied at 1,800. And with our new rental registration, we'll have an idea of how many of those are year rentals versus less than 30-day rentals. We don't have that number yet.
We don't have the numbers definitively, but we did do it conservatively so we wouldn't be swaying either way. But I will tell you this, I had Jamie Gorman, our building inspector, run some numbers this week, and there were 454 short-term rentals that like these companies, like we even reached out to some companies that, you know, monitor, the air DNA, just to get an idea. And so we have about an estimate of about 450, 460 short-term rentals in the town. So, but if we had a rental registry, we would definitively know, I wouldn't say in short order, but we'd know at some point with more accuracy where, what those numbers would be. Non-owner occupied, owner occupied. But once again, to reiterate, so it doesn't confuse anyone, we use the number of where the tax bills are going, and initially it was about 77%, but once we really bared down on these numbers and went over and over them a dozen times, it's more like 80%. And that's even conservative, because we came up today with some of the scenarios where the tax bills could be going to banks, correct, Brian? And Wendy, is that what we were assuming? It could be higher.
It could be higher because, of course, we're talking about assumptions. I personally know individuals who have owner-occupied homes who they send their bills to P.O. boxes, or if they have it in a trust, they'll send it to their administrator in Providence or an attorney. So it could be potentially larger, but like Mr. May said, that conservatively speaking, we're making an assumption that the bills that are being mailed to the situs are owner-occupied, and the ones that are not being mailed to the situs are non, but I'm sure there are owner-occupied in that non-owner-occupied number. How many, we wouldn't know until we administrate.
I think that'll be interesting to find out. You know, if we look at numbers, like if for say in our short-term rentals registration, we actually boosted our fee to mirror other municipalities in the area. You know, you do 450 times $500, and that's $250,000 of revenue that the town could bring in. Just wanted to build on something that the Vice President said. When the homestead exemption was in Providence, I believe they had to sign an affidavit every year in order to receive it, so that keeps folks
Yes,
honest.
that's correct.
You know, I think that making sure that the equity in that and making sure that people actually live in their homes are getting that is going to be crucial. So I'm glad we went over that. I'll let my colleagues ask more questions before I ask another one.
I have a question about, sorry,
So I just have, right now, a short question. On page 26, you talk about the eligibility requirements. Is that the language that's part of the enabling legislation? Because my question pertains to the third bullet. The owners cannot rent any portion of their single-family home, and I think about that and hold the possible increase in ADUs where people may be constructing them on their property for them to move in or their children to move in, and then that is a situation where then they're not eligible. I'm just curious.
So we got most of this from neighboring towns that have a rental registration. I do not believe those requirements are in.
They're not. I don't think so.
And I think it even addresses it, that the town is responsible for coming up with the regulations to allow people to get a homestead.
Right. It just read like this was. I just wanted to clarify. I didn't think it was part of it, but it read like it was part of it.
It did.
So we wouldn't want that because many people own their home, and then they're building an accessory dwelling for their mother, their child, and if that's an affordable, restricted thing, then it's not. You've then X'd yourself out of any exemption. So.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
I wondered about that language myself. I think when we start getting into the nitty-gritty of it, we need to work on that language. To me, that's too broad.
So just to go back for 1 second, option 3, where we would expand the exemptions, to me, I think option 2. No, is it 2? It's the one where we look at the exemptions, and the elderly exemption, the legally blind, and others, veterans, sorry. I think that's where we could look at some potential expansion. One, because this already exists and there's a process for vetting the applications and people are familiar with it. A couple of adjustments in brainstorming. Does it have to be 65? Could it be 62? Right? So there's a way, we need to think about what's the goal. Is the goal to expand or reduce the tax rate for the most vulnerable who are income and resource fragile? Or is it widespread? Option one looks like everybody who's owner occupied could get something. The downside to the original option, the first option presented, is there's a lot of administrative costs. Is the juice worth the squeeze? Is $100 or $200 going to mean something for the amount of work? Is that meaningful to people? I don't know. Because on the other side, it's really easy in some ways to just hold spending level, and everybody does benefit because the overall tax rate doesn't grow. So there's another way to help all people is if you control spending. The other piece that I think about is this flipping over to the budget for 26, 27, which we saw just a potential, same amount of increase. That's holding the assumption that the school budget, which was level funded, remains level funded, and there's no increase in what we use for the debt service to the bonds. So that is not known. You're going to say something.
Within our current year budget, we had growth in our budget for the bond of about $1 million. So I was assuming another growth of $1 million in the next year. So that 2.5 is essentially $1 million for the bond and 1.5 for operations. Just
Okay. And it's still holding the school transfer at the same, which we may or may not be doing that. Who knows what it looks like. But I think those are the simplest way to manage the tax rate and what people pay is to be very mindful of the spending, because that's where it goes, right? And so, but I also think on the other side, there is a very strong unseen vulnerable population that may be benefiting from, we could do more there. So that's my sense of what I understand.
I was just wanting some further clarification on page 6. So what confuses me a little bit is we see we have 52%. Okay, so I guess in order, I'm just trying to figure out how we get to that 80% of owner occupied that we think that we're at based on these figures. So if somebody could...
Yeah, I can explain that.
Okay.
I anticipated this question, because the first time I looked at it, I'm like, okay, why does this go from here to here? Where's the 80?
Okay.
But if you can follow it, first of all, we threw everything, we threw all the facts at you that we have, assumptions, facts, and whatever. There's a lot, this is a complex thought process we follow, and that's why it's so difficult sometimes to follow these numbers. But let's go over to page 6 and go over that again. So the total number of properties on the tax roll of 14,302. The single-family owner-occupied, of that number, is 7,443, which is 52% of that number, okay? The single-family non-owner-occupied is 1,831, which is 13% of that number, the 14,302. Now we start narrowing it down. So the total single-family is 9,274, and if you look to the right, that's 65% of the 14,302. But now we need to see who's eligible. This is where we start having to really narrow it down. Here's where the 80% comes in. Who would be eligible for a homestead exemption? Owner-occupied, single-family owner-occupied. That's the 7,443. So if you look at the total single-family, which is 9,274, that's where the number comes in. 7,443 represents 80% of that number, 9,274. The 1,831 represents 20% of that number. So we narrowed it down to who would be eligible. And then at the bottom, you have all of the properties. So the percentages on the right are just the percentages of where they fall in the total properties. Then we narrow it down to single-family properties.
Thank you. That makes sense.
I'm going to jump in here quick. Page 50. Just want to walk through a little bit of this. So this is assuming that 80% of the single-family homes are owner-occupied, and the remaining properties in town are non-resident owner-occupied, so 20%. But is it true to say that once we establish these eligibility requirements, that 80% will dwindle down by those persons who fail to provide 3 of those 5 proof of residency documents as identified on page 26? Like, it's fair to say that even though persons receive mail at a home they own, that doesn't necessarily mean it's owner-occupied. It's a good prediction. It's, maybe accurate in most instances, but it's not accurate all the time. And if, in fact, it will, decrease the amount, the percentage allocation that we're looking at, then the amount on the right, the total increase per non-resident owner occupied per household would decrease, right? There'd be more persons to absorb the increase, bringing down the total increase per non-resident owner occupied property. And also increase the total savings per resident owner occupied because it lessens the pool of persons eligible for the savings here we've identified. Is that correct to say?
I think that's an assumption that you could say, for sure, that if we're using these assumption numbers of 80% based on where the tax bills are mailed to, but would everyone either qualify, or is that a wrong assumption we're making? But I'm not so sure it would go down substantially. Maybe go to 75%, maybe 70%. So the numbers would go up on savings, but we don't know that.
And the amount in the increase for the non-resident would also decrease per home.
If that was the case, yes.
I also want to go to page 16, just to go right here. Just want to walk through this a little bit. So 894, that's the tax rate we enacted. That's for the existing fiscal year. If the homestead were to go in place, this is the amount of revenue lost as a result of the homestead exemption given out. Is that correct? Just want to make sure we're walking through this right. And then the amount of the increase or the tax rate would have to increase to 920 to make up for the lost revenue. And then after we've increased the tax rate, then we give the relief. Just want to talk through, like, practically how it works here. Assuming 894 is the rate, if we put a homestead exemption in place, assuming 894 is the rate, we'd have to increase the tax rate to $9.20 per $1,000 valuation to make up for the lost revenue associated with the homestead exemption. Yes. Is that correct?
So we are assuming, again, based on the assumption we're making, the homestead exemption at 5% would result in assessed values being pulled out of the net assessed value of $2 billion, almost $2.2 billion, which would result in a loss in revenue, as stated, of just under $2.2 million. Yes.
And so we would pass these in tandem, like we pass the new tax rate and simultaneously pass homestead exemption?
So this is based on, we're working off of what we have. We have the current year, and we're going forward 1 year. I believe, and Wendy, please jump in, but I believe this would actually go after our next reval. So it would actually be 2 years out.
We live in 2 different worlds, fiscal year, and I live in year end, but we're not Santa Claus. We can't put it all on the books for 12/31/2025. So we don't get forms in. We're just, the example is like a cake, right? You want the cake slice, but we're still in the kitchen, right? All our clerks, we're getting forms, and we're getting elderly forms, and up until May, we're putting them all in exemptions, tangible forms. Nothing goes out till December. So even though in reality it seems like we should kind of know where we're at for year end, we just started. We've got January, February, March, April, May. We are zipping. So we go right up until that certification, June 15th. We need every second and every day that we can have. I can make my best guess on where we're going to land, but I'm not a gambling gal with this type of thing. So when we start our budget discussions in February, it is very difficult for our office, especially in a reval year, is we're still shaking and scrubbing that. So even though the reval was for year-end 12/31/2024, which are our numbers right now, right? Those bills went out. Those are known numbers. That's a comfortable baseline for us because that's what we know. We don't know where we're going to land. I could give you a guess, but I wouldn't put my name on it.
But to answer your question direct, the answer is yes. You would have to raise everyone's taxes by this amount so that you can lower the people eligible for the homestead exemption by this amount.
All right, and just to keep going down this a little further, this particular scenario here, where we look at the increase associated with the homestead exemption here. So that's essentially the amounts we have to increase on the non-resident owner occupied to make up the difference here. We have to increase the tax rate to everybody, then give the exemption. That's the way I understand this. And then we look at an increase in projected operating costs. This is just an increase, a projection based on what we increased in the last budget as compared to the prior year. That's something that is within the control of the council to limit to the extent possible if we want or if we believe, we have to fund it for operations of the town. That's sort of a policy decision. Now, do we know what portion of this projected increase in operating budget represents like fixed costs, salary increases as part of labor bargaining agreements, things like that, things we don't have much leeway to decrease?
This was really taken as a snapshot looking at the current year. So of that $2.5 million, approximately $1 million is associated with the expected growth in the bond for the high school and $1.5 million on operational costs. It wasn't broken down at this point any further than that at this point.
So, but, Mr. President, so one statistic I use every year is what is the fixed cost to run the town based on 100%? And it's right around 94 cents on the dollar. 94% of what we budget, there's only about 6% that is discretionary, maybe 6%, but that 6% doesn't mean it's added programs or anything like that. So to answer your question, about 94 to 95% of what we put in for the proposed budget is fixed costs, salaries, capital, stuff like that. There's very little we can cut.
And then, just don't finish this out here. So when we're talking about the 4% cap, that's the cap in the increase of the tax levy as compared to the prior year. So when we're looking at an increase of 6.26% in the tax rate, that's not something that needs legislative approval. It would only if the tax levy had increased over 4%.
That's correct. Again, at the bottom, when looking at the bottom of this page, when referring to the cap, you'd be looking at that 3.23% number. That's the levy increase, and that's what's dictated by the 4% state cap. So we'd be under that, yes.
And what was the levy increase from the budget we passed that we're currently in as compared to the prior year?
3.28%.
All right, so even if we move forward with a budget and simultaneously the homestead exemption, the tax levy increase would be less than it was the budget we had most recently passed.
This is projected, as long as you understand.
This thing is projection.
Yes, yes.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilor, did you want to go before them?
I just wanted to go back to we were on page 6, and we were talking about the single family, and this is, I think, related to what you had said earlier about rentals. So, in a previous meeting, I think we talked about if you're a year-round rental person, right, does that property owner who rents to you for the year, should they be included in the exemptions? And possibly yes, because the more that you push on the landlord to raise the rent, you then make the town continue to be unaffordable. So in some ways, I heard Rory sort of talking about maybe all those owner-occupieds aren't really owner-occupieds, and maybe it's not 80%, it's 75%. Likewise, if we look at, there are a number of wonderful landlords who rent 12 months to people, and we need those families and those people in our community, all those people, to be a part of the community. We can't, if we exclude them from the homestead exemption, we end up ultimately raising their rents. right? So I think in some ways, you can, you want to include the year-round rentals. I think somehow this exemption is a challenge, whereas I think the exemptions, established exemptions and age requirements make sense and established. This is an enigma to me.
Trying to understand your point.
So
Owner-occupied doesn't matter,
No, it does, but if
but if their landlord's renting out a single-family home,
we have,
You're right, there was a discussion on,
Yes.
on one of the community bulletin boards or somewhere today.
I didn't see that today, we had it at the meeting.
Okay, well, there was one also today, on one of the community bulletin boards. Somebody made this point about, how we really want to encourage long-term rentals, and so shouldn't we really make this exemption available to landlords who are renting for year-round? And so, sort of following that thought process through, if they were to get a little exemption on this end, they might also save on the other end with a potential rental registry. If, we were sort of, they would save money on that also if they weren't renting it. So it could be together somewhat more of an incentive.
I think the point also is, if you're renting year-round, your landlord is not enjoying the homestead exemption, and he's passing on, or she or they are passing on the increase via the rent. And so, if the ultimate goal is to keep South Kingstown affordable and vibrant and people can live here, then you wouldn't want to disadvantage a group that we literally want to cultivate. People want to live here and be able to rent. If they can't buy a home, they want to be able to rent. If you pay attention anywhere, people are begging for rentals, right? I need a year-round rental. I'm a good renter. Please help me. It comes up all the time. So in some ways, it makes it harder for that to happen here, because now we've made the rents higher because the tax rate burden just goes right to them. It's passed along.
So I had a couple points I wanted to make. And just as an aside, I've been a long-term renter in my adult life, and I've never met a landlord that brought the savings down to me as a renter. So I want to talk about option 2 for a second, because I know there was some favorability looked at it. I agree with the council president. We should definitely make sure that our COLA levels for our exemptions should be updated for sure yearly. But I do want to just point out that who the homestead exemption is for, right? It's for folks who are trying to stay in their homes and make it affordable. I think about my long-term friends from Snug Harbor, Dan and Melanie, who South Kingstown graduates. They're in their early 30s, have 2 kids, babies, young kids, and they own a home in Indian Lake. And they wouldn't qualify for option 2, I don't think, right? If in their 30s, they wouldn't qualify for any of option 2 exemptions. So I think that's a problem, right? We are trying to have a younger generation be able to afford South Kingstown, and simply expanding option 2 does not misses a large part of a large plurality of our population, some young people who are homeowners, trying to expand that, trying to keep residents who graduate South Kingstown, if they can find property, buy it, and live here. I think that option 1 is something we should seriously consider. Staging it in, getting it to 5%, and relooking at it the following year after we have a new revenue analysis from the financials. And I think option 3, I'd just like to kind of go through that. That's page 25. Now, Jim, is Narragansett option 3? Is that what they did? The homestead exemption in Narragansett, they did a 3-tiered tax rate?
I think they had a 3-tier tax rate anyway. The commercial rate was higher. The residential rate was higher. I think they have a 2-tier. It was 2-tier when I was there. They might have a 3-tier now, but really it was option 1, the 10%. Mm-hmm. That was how they did it, because they had 1/3 owner occupied, 1/3 rental, which they passed on the and then 1/3 were vacation homes. So they had 67% of the town they could pass on an increase based on them giving the 1/3 owner-occupied a tax 10% homestead exemption.
Now, in this document, Brian, where is the closest thing to option 3 fleshed out? Having a 3-tier tax rate. Is it in this at all? Did you give us any?
No, we did not. These are possible. So there's many options, and these are what the solicitor and I were talking about. You could say, okay, anyone whose home is valued more than the median assessed value is not qualified for any homestead, right? That could be an option. An income-based option, a tiered tax rate, resident and non-resident. But the last one, the answer is no. These are future. If you just say to us, we're going to look at number 3, we would have to come up with a model for that as well. But there's really a ton of options that we just couldn't.
So, councilors, I think that we should ask them to flesh out option 3 or the possible additional option is number 3, the tiered tax rate. I think that's something to consider. I think that the goal of what we're trying to do here is make being a resident of South Kingstown really valuable and to have the best bang for their bucks from their government. And that's what the homestead exemption is trying to do, trying to lower the tax rate for the residents of South Kingstown. So I would be interested in learning more about that, for sure.
So I had a question about the schedule of fees for back to the, look at the mic, for the elderly tax abatement, veterans exemptions. Is there a way for it to be more efficient so we don't, or so that we always account for COLA more routinely instead of, right, Wendy's saying thank you. So I feel like, is there a way to change the ordinance to reflect like the town assessor adjusts annual the fees according to COLA and we write that into the ordinance so that we don't have this drama every time?
The answer is yes.
Okay. So maybe like if I'm looking to the left, do you think that maybe that we try to work with the town staff to sort of tweak the legislation so that Wendy doesn't have to present it, it's just sort of automatic as part of the budget presentation? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yes.
is that ordinance?
I think so.
I believe it's set by ordinance, right, Wendy?
It is.
It is.
The schedule is in the ordinance, and I just want to clarify, I misspoke, Council President, when I said that we did this in 22. It was February 27, 2023.
Yeah.
Prior to that, it was 2022. So we raised that high tier from 43,251 to that 45,197. We had some turnover, so I think it just didn't come through the last year and a half. But if you could embed it into the legislation, the ordinance where it's to keep up with the percentage, that would be helpful. And then we wouldn't have to come here every year. If we miss a year or if, God forbid, something happened and we have turnover, it falls through the cracks pretty easily.
So that's a really good change for efficiency and work product and process. So I feel like people sort of nodded. So do we need to do anything more, or will you pick this up and?
I'll work with Wendy and we'll draft
Because I know we
for your
can't
future
vote.
consideration.
We can't vote tonight, but we can.
Yes, we can do that.
We can guide. So I think that's one thing I think would be easier for everybody.
And if you want, we can make copies. I do have possible amounts for the increase if you want to do this today with 2.6, 4.6, and with 10. If you went to 10%, it would increase that top tier threshold to 49,717. If you want, I can make copies or at a later time.
I just think look at the COLAs and then just maybe that's the guidance. And so then you know to go back a year, and then if we miss 24 and 25 or whatever, you just adjust and then.
I think we'll have to make the initial increase and then allow you the authority to increase every year thereafter.
Yeah, but I feel like then it's like one less part of the meeting that we're.
I agree, and it'll be just part of the year-end process.
Yeah, and I guess that's the same. Would it be the same for the veterans and do they all get the COLA?
Those do not get the COLA.
Okay.
I think that's just discretionary, to be honest. We've historically just every few years revisited those, and in particular that blind exemption, we do got to clean up that ordinance a little bit as well.
Visual impairment, you need to change?
Long story, but it doesn't reference the amount that we're giving, so we just have to clean up the language.
I'll work with Wendy on the whole package, so to speak. We'll do whatever updates that we need to do. We'll fix whatever problems there are, and we'll work accordingly.
So under possible additional options, page 25, number 1 is income-based, and just had some questions about what that might look like or does in fact look like in another town.
I'm not sure what other town does the income base. I'd be more than happy to deep dive and research that possible additional option. I think the elderly exemption with the income base kind of speaks to that, unless you've got something else to add.
Yeah, so the income base is possible, anything's possible, but how much work does it take to get there? So you can imagine 7,500 residents coming in with their tax returns and us trying to figure out, okay, you meet the criteria. It'd be a lot of work to do it, but we don't know what kind of investments they have. You know, it's just based on income. How do you want to define income? It's possible, is what I'm saying. It's just, that's why you need clerical administrative help to figure out there's 7,500 people that could qualify for this. Could.
Right. I was thinking it would be something like the AMI, but you would have to submit your tax returns and all
You
that
always
stuff.
determine what their income is by looking at a tax return.
Right.
But it could be as simple as looking at line 24 on 1040, what's your adjusted gross income under the federal return? We'd have to figure out year to year what that
Yeah, every year.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not for 7,500 people, just to set the bar.
But you could be cash poor and land rich. I mean,
Well, I think a lot of us are. I mean, I think that is the tale of, of somebody who moved here 20 years ago and purchased their home for $200,000, and then 20 years later it's worth, way more, and they're 20 years older and don't make as much money. So there's a lot of people that are in that situation.
Again, I think some of it is, if you want it to be affordable and all people benefit, the biggest thing that we control is the spending of the town, right? And that's where the slide says $894, right? That was the tax rate. We all know in a 4-to-1 vote, you chose to keep it at $894 and not $890. It could have been $890. That's affordable. That's $40. That's 1/3 of your 5% exemption right there for everybody. So just saying there's ways that it can be affordable. It's hard work. It can be done on the spending side.
I have a couple more questions on the details in the presentation. But before I get to that, to Patty's point a minute ago, the context of this, at least as I remember it, was when we were considering the high school and the bond, there was a discussion about people not being able to afford to continue living in their houses here because the taxes were going to go up $450 for an average taxpayer. And that's when we started talking about trying to find some compromise for a homestead exemption so that the people who need it the most are the ones that we're trying to help out. The three tiers, or the three additional options that you're listing there, the second one really is what the homestead exemption is. You get a preferential rate if you're a resident, and if you're a non-resident, you don't. The earlier point about people who rent for 12 months, I think is conflating two different ideas. We can have some incentive for landlords in relation to rentals that is separate and apart from the property tax itself. And I'd be happy to discuss that. I just think that to do the homestead exemption and get it done by the end of the year so that Wendy can plan for the following year makes sense. The two specific questions I have is, in the presentation on page 4, Providence was listed as a tiered tax system, and my recollection is they used to have, and I think Jay had said, they used to have a homestead exemption, but they abandoned it. Does anybody know why?
Yes, I spoke to Mayor Smiley about that last year. So their homestead exemption was their legislation, enabling legislation, was much different than this. The numbers he was using for me were much greater than 10%. And it was kind of like a favoritism, like certain property owners could get up to like a double-digit homestead exemption. It was not structured the way this one was. It was the only one in the state that was. So I believe he revoked it. He revoked it because it wasn't fair, he said. It wasn't fair to everybody.
The other question I had, and this is, I don't want to start a whole separate discussion, but just for purposes of due diligence for tonight, you also mentioned 709 tax-exempt properties in the entire count.
Yep.
How many of those properties, if you know, participate in the pilot program?
Wendy, you could probably, I don't know if you have those numbers now.
We only have a few pilots,
Yeah,
less
not
than
many.
4, so.
Not many.
Less than a half dozen.
Oh, yeah.
If we could get a description of what the 709 are, because it's big enough that it is a factor in this, what the 709 properties are, which ones participate in the program, what the parameters of the program are. I think we need to at least take that into account in figuring all of this.
Included in that 709, which Wendy can speak to in greater detail, just so it's known as part of this, included in that 709 is tangible property taxes as well. The tangible exemption from the state is part of our total exemption, and so that would be part of that number as well.
If you can include that in it, just so that we all know how it operates.
Mine is just a small, I'm sure this presentation will come back again in some form. So if you could just include the years that those municipalities established the homestead exemptions and the tiered tax rate, it'd be really helpful, right? So is West Greenwich from 2002, or is it who's new, so that we, because I know someone did all the research and has all the different things, but are these, who's the most recent town, where, did we talk to them and figure out, like, what's working, what's not working? Because I think we had a conversation, Brian and Jim and I, about freezing them in some municipality, and then they rolled back from that. I want to feel like saying it was Smithfield, but maybe it isn't Smithfield.
Might have been Warwick.
No, it was.
I know Cranston used to have a homestead, didn't they?
No, they froze the rate, and
I believe that is Smithfield.
It is Smithfield.
I'm a few years removed now, but they do have a homestead, and
right.
There's an age restriction, I believe, on theirs, where you hit a certain age. I think theirs is age-based.
Right. So just a little tweak to the presentation, because I think it would be helpful to know which municipality has most recently done this. Maybe it would be helpful to someone else, but it would be helpful to the community, I think.
So I've had like anecdotal conversations with town managers and mayors, like, how do you do this? Tell me how you got to this point. It always came down to this. They had some entity, some properties that they could pass the tax revenue off to, whether it was large commercial, industrial, like I said, the easy ones I talked about were like Block Island and Narragansett, where the owner-occupied was very low. So they always had something. This town, the demographics of this town are very different than pretty much any other town. It's most of our tax, it was $71 million of our tax levy comes from homes. So we have very small amount that we can pass to commercial, industrial, other. It's a small amount, but there's only $8 million of tax coming in at that level, from 71 to 79 million on the tax levy. So it's just that the demographics of this town, quite honestly, I don't think could support a 10% reduction. I think, but that's something you would have to decide.
Jim, I got a few questions on page 22, 23. That's on option 3. We haven't talked much about it. You go to that, yeah, right here. I just want to get a sense of what we're looking at here. So this would essentially be relief, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000. That would be on all properties that are resident, owner occupied, regardless of value. So the same relief would be given to a homeowner who has a house valued at $500,000, and the same relief would be given to a home valued at $2 million. So everyone across the board just gets the same relief. That's what we're looking at here. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, as compared to option 1, where we have the 5% homestead exemption.
Can I, Mr. President, can I go back to that option?
Yeah.
I talked to Michael Solo about it, and he's pretty familiar. He's a solicitor in 38 out of the 39 towns. But all kidding aside, so you could, as an option, limit the homestead, even at these rates, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, to the homes that are valued at, say, the median price and down.
Okay.
So if you look at that statistic, and we were doing these statistics, they were actually pretty shocking to me as well. Like, a lot of the homes, was it like 4,600 homes in this town are median price or lower? So if you come to the conclusion those are the people that need the tax relief the most, you could say, okay, you're only eligible for any type of homestead if your house is valued at this much down, 600,000 and down, or 560 and down. So that way, if you look on page 20, there's no number on this one, 23, the tax revenue loss would go down because you're not giving it to all the other 4,000, 5,000 other homes. The ones that are $1 million, $2 million, $3 million. You'd be giving a $10,000 exemption on a house worth 560, or a 10,000 exemption under this plan, a house that's worth $1 million.
Yeah, but just so I can qualify that a little, and I want to check on this, I think, though, the way it would have to work, Jim, is that it'd be up to 600,000, say, or the 585 across the board. If someone has $1 million house, I'm pretty sure they would qualify for the exemption up to that dollar amount, as opposed to saying the 500,000, 600,000, you get it, but the $1 million, you get nothing. I just need to do a little more homework on that. We're just throwing out all kinds of ideas tonight, but I'll find out definitively for you.
Wait, I just want to finish this out.
So
I'm still in my thought here. Let me just finish my line of questioning.
Ask a question related
Hold on.
to that.
You can go right after this. So I just want to compare what we're looking at here to option 1. So option 1 is providing a 5% homestead exemption. So when we look at this, essentially the higher value the home, or the higher assessed value of the home, the more relief that the owner gets. Is that correct? That's the way I look at this?
Yeah, yes, if it's like 5%, it goes all the way.
Now, could we similarly provide a cap, like?
Yeah, I'm going to get that checked out for you definitively.
All right, to the extent we do provide a cap, either on option 1 or option 3,
right,
the amount of the increase to the non-owner, non-resident owners would now be decreased, because there would be less relief given out, meaning there would be
Yes.
less increase to be transferred over to the non-resident owners. Is that correct?
That would be correct, yes.
Okay. I think that's something that we should definitely sort of look at, explore, see what the...
Could you say that again?
For the people in the back that don't follow accounting language.
People right to the left, yes, that don't.
All right, so we were looking at option 3, which we have on the screen here. The way it's presented is that to the extent relief is given for 10,000, 20, or 30, up to 200, it would be the same amount of relief to every homeowner, resident owner, regardless of the value of the property.
Correct.
But if we put a cap on that, saying your relief we're given is only up to a value of 600,000, for example, that would limit the amount of total relief given. So it would limit the amount of total tax revenue loss, such that the amount shifted to the non-resident owners would be less than if we didn't have a cap. And the same would be true for option one. Is that correct, Mike? Is that like
I understand your logic.
okay. Kim, hold on.
Debbie.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry,
I just don't want it to become a very complicated system that we couldn't explain to people. Like, you gotta go out to the residents and be like, this is what we adopted. And I understand, I think what you're asking, to like limit, so like if your home is worth $1 million, you would only the first 600,000 would be included in whatever the exemption would be, correct?
Yes.
That's what, I'm just trying
That's
to make
how
it
I'm understanding it, yes.
simple, right?
I like that.
Okay, that's what you're saying, so then it's like a graduated, so is it a very cumbersome process to explain to people, and then at the bottom line, if people are like, what did you 5 people do? You made this very complicated system, and I'm only, you're giving me $20 back. And Wendy and her staff, or whoever, and Nicole's staff, we create a whole process for, like, it's a lot, again, it's a lot of work for a very complicated system. I don't know, is it
We'd have to have another work session where we could see what the numbers look like. They can explain to us what the administrative burden would be, and then we'd sort of deliberate. I mean, this is like our first meeting,
Yeah.
exposure to this information, and we're brainstorming. And I think that there's obviously more to explore, but I think what we had just talked about is something to further explore.
Jim, so, whatever form of homestead exemption we pass, right, and then folks come in and next year and have their 5 pieces of, information they need, and then enforcement goes to who? Buildings, or does it go to planning? Who's enforcement?
Well, if you have a homestead, you'd have to have a clerk and tax assessor handle that part of it.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a rental registration, that would be under the building inspector.
Got it. And so, have you looked at any of the rates of penalties for making a false, claim of residency? Have we looked into that at all? Have any other municipalities?
Yeah, so the issue I asked many years ago was, if you sign an affidavit, what's the punishment? And I really did not get a clear answer as to, it was never really enforced that I know of. Now,
Yeah, right. That's difficult. I think the penalty, if I may, the penalty would be if you lie on your affidavit, or we find out, and this would be a really tiny percent, you just wouldn't qualify anymore, and you go back and say, we can go back 6 years on taxes under Rhode Island statutes and say you actually owe us X, Y, and Z. I think that's the way it would play out in practicality.
And I'm just trying to think practically, how would that mechanism work? I mean, is someone...
Let's just talk in generic terms. If you fail to register, I'm just using this as an example because it's easy. Under rental registration, if you fail to register knowingly, there's a fine attached to it. So instead of a $300 fee, it goes up to $500, $600 that you owe, right? You can enforce that just like that. Same thing would kind of be with a homestead. If you lie and you're collecting a homestead in Florida, and you collected it in South Kingstown, there would have to be a penalty structure or a municipal court appearance, something, housing court, to address that for intentionally lying, deceit. So I don't have any of those numbers yet.
No problem. Informally, I did a little research, and some municipalities have $1,000 fines, and because it is important to make sure that the taxpayers' money is going in the right direction. People do that all the time, right? Folks dual residency all the time, and we don't want them getting the discount here. So,
one question I have with respect to option 3 that you have listed mentioned commercial property, but the diagram on page 6 doesn't break out how many properties in town are commercial, and I'm pretty sure that it's very low to begin with. And back to an earlier comment from the table, I'd be leery about having a multi-tier system that taxes commercial higher than residential, because I think it has the potential to become an excuse.
Our neighboring town, I believe, is 135% of the residential rate right now for commercial property. It was 150 back in 2016. they lowered it a little. So really, you asked the question before, the answer is, there were three tax rates. A commercial rate, which is higher than a residential rate, the residential rate, and then you have a rate for the non-residents because they were not getting the benefit of a homestead. So there were really three tiers at that time.
But we don't have data with respect to the commercial aspect. That was my point.
We don't. We would take research to, once again, we knew we wouldn't have all the answers tonight.
Yeah.
We're looking for direction, what you want us to bring the next time.
In looking at option 3, which is the flat rate, and comparing that to the 5% lower exemption to 5%, I noticed that the total savings would be $117.27 with an adjusted tax rate of $920. But if you look at option 3, the flat rate between 20 and 30,000, it looks like if you just sort of split the difference between 910 and 917, you'd be at like say 914, and you would save probably like 100 and if you split the difference between 88 and 140, it would be around 115 or I don't know, maybe it is the same. Am I asking this question correctly? Like, it seems like it's about the same to achieve $100 savings. It's sort of either 6 of one, half a dozen of another.
I just want to rephrase it one more time to make sure I'm following you.
So I'm just trying to figure out how we can get, some tax relief that would be, significant. Obviously, maybe we had hoped that we could do something greater than this, but upon understanding the situation of the town, we find ourselves trying to weigh other options. So, sort of looking at the value, lowering the exemption to 5%, the consumer, the resident would save $117.27. The adjusted tax rate would be $9.20. But if you flip back just to the flat rate, where you're saying we're going to exempt the first 20 or 30,000, it looks like you might actually the resident might save more in this scenario, and the tax rate would be slightly lower. So it would be like between 910 and 917. So I just wondered if I'm understanding that correctly, or if you could explain it better.
No, you are correct. The 5% does represent, it's very close to the 30,000 on the flat rate. So where one is a percent based, it works out very closely to on page 23, the 30,000. So they are very similar in figures, as you mentioned. Yes.
Is there a reason why it might be better to do one versus the other? Like, is there some accounting magical thing?
Just options, I think. Yeah, we just have 1% based and one different options. Yeah.
Just to sort of follow up on that and circle back on the cap discussion there. Now that we're looking at option 3, it sounds like, Mike Ursullo, what you're saying is you could cap it up to a certain amount, but if you capped it up to a certain amount, this would still apply to every homeowner. If we exempted the first 10,000 of value, that would apply across the board. And are we able to exclude certain properties with a value over a certain amount? If not, then this would not provide us like an attractive route here. Yeah. When I say that, I mean there's no way to exclude the amount of relief to anyone. It would be the same amount of relief to all.
With the flat rate.
With a flat rate.
Absolutely.
The percent base would.
Okay, so the 5% homestead, that's the only way we could sort of limit
By the way,
total
a
relief.
5% homestead doesn't mean you're getting a true 5% off. The same way a 10% doesn't mean you'd get 10% off. 10% homestead, you get 4% off. 5% would be half that, Brian, about 2%.
Because the rate has to go up, right?
Yes.
What they're saying is the real savings on your tax bill.
Net savings
Yeah, the net savings.
is about half that. Because of the 80-20 split.
Okay, but I'm talking about, if we were to look at a potential cap and reducing the amount of tax revenue loss associated to the relief given to all persons eligible for the
It would
relief,
have to be the percentage.
would have to be the percentage homestead, for example, the 5% homestead.
Yes, these flat rate, you couldn't do that.
Okay. Okay. I think we've had some good discussion.
Mr. President, if we could just recap, could you please go over what the council wants for the next work session so that it's clear?
Yeah. I mean, I would like to see what the figures look like for a cap amount of, maybe at different scenarios, with 600,000, 700,000, just to see what that looks like. That would be for option 1. Obviously, that's not relevant for option 3. If we have the ability to exclude properties over a certain value, which I don't know if we do, then I think we can look at that in tandem with option 3 here. I know we also wanted to look at potential additional options. Tiered tax rate. I guess we would like to see what both of those tiered tax rate options would look like. Go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of things. With respect to the earlier discussion on commercial, I'd say the total number of commercial properties and the total values for the commercial properties as well, and maybe an average. Also, if we're going to look into the percentage option that Rory was just talking about, 2 additional pieces of data would be some grouping, Wendy, of total values. So $1 million to $1.5 million, $1.5 million to $2 million, over $2 million, and I'm just using arbitrary figures, whatever you think is appropriate, so that we can get an idea of how many raw properties are actually going to be affected in the discussion that we're going to have.
I can do that easily. I do have that. Not right now, but.
And at the same time, if you could update the impact for the expanded elderly abatements, because right now it's whatever, 175,000 or something, I forget what the exemptions total, but like if we expand the totals, we're growing a program over here, we're growing a program over here, so it could be expensive. So I'd just like to see what that is. So, 277 is the elderly exemption. So if we expanded it based on the new incomes, capturing maybe, I don't know, I guess you can see every time we've changed it, did the numbers of participants change over time?
I can give you a synopsis on the historical nature of the exemption, where we are now, and then historically, if we project on average it's 2.5 to 3% a year, maybe what that might look like 5 years down the road.
Right. What will the impact of, will the program be? Did we just expand it and now it's $500,000 in elderly abatement? Is that, and do you get that and the homestead exemption? I mean, is that a question to ask? Jim?
Yes, I've got that.
Mike, you can get it all? Mike, you can get the elderly tax abatement and the homestead exemption? You could layer?
Oh, yes, you can layer.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely, you can layer.
Okay.
Can we also get out of the single-family non-owner occupied homes how many we think are short-term rentals under 30 days, and how much revenue could we bring in?
That's going to be the red.
That's going to be the red. Okay, that's fine.
And earlier I tried to express about the black and white, but I think really what I wanted to express is just maybe these color boxes could go away so that people that are printing them at home don't have to, waste all their toner. So yeah.
Or just create it in black and white as a secondary PDF, right? So you don't have to, this is a beautiful presentation, and I think it's.
It is a gorgeous presentation.
Well, I would be hesitant, I mean, the importance is following this stuff, right? You know where the green is savings, red is expenditures.
Well, it's just that some people have expressed at home that it's a lot for them to print out 27 pages and like all this color, and they're
Can you
going,
just print it black and white? Doesn't there
Yeah,
setting
but
that
you
says
know
black?
what?
oh, yeah, but it would still be so much black.
It does
like,
use a lot
it's
of
too much
toner.
black. It's too much.
Take out all the blue, right? There's a lot, take out the
Just
blue and then
take
keep the
out-
white in the background.
Yeah, that would be so awesome.
And great job. Thank you for putting this together for us.
Yes, it's really, really well done and very attractive to look at too, but it'll still look good.
All right, Jim, you're clear on some different things to present?
We'll need some time to do this. I mean, it took us a month to get to this point of working every day on it, literally. So we'll need some time to gather this data again, a different form of data, and get it back to you. So I don't know what your time frame. What are you thinking of in another work session? 2 months? Month and a half?
Can you do 1 month?
Well,
Just
that's
a friendly-
Thanksgiving, so it's
All
a
right.
short random.
How about December?
Is that the CIP?
The CIP's in December.
And then we have a
All right,
budget meeting.
well, how about at the first meeting in November, we can sort of discuss it during the manager's report?
Yeah, I'm not going to be at that meeting. I'm going to be out of state. That's only in two
That's
weeks.
November 10th.
How about the second meeting in November?
I think we don't have one. Oh, no, we do. We
It's
do. What's the
Thanksgiving,
date?
is that
Yeah,
Thanksgiving?
yeah, we can talk that one.
Is it
All right.
Thanksgiving
We'll
week?
deliberate then, and then see what's reasonable as an expectation.
Oh, so the
24th.
second meeting in November, you come up with a date for the next work session? Is that what you want to do?
Correct.
Okay.
You'll give us sort of what reasonable expectations as
we'll
to
start.
when a work
I mean,
session
that's
could be held.
close, but
So, but for people who are wondering, when might I see anything, it would be in the 2027 tax bills. Correct?
Fiscal year, so if we're,
July.
if it's enabled for year end 12/31/2025, that's the 2026 tax bill. And I am in the middle of my appeal season, just a friendly reminder.
Yep. So, there's never a good time, because as we think, we're rolling right into the CIP and budget hearings in December, and then roll on to budget.
All right, Jim, so the second meeting in November, the manager's report will at least take up discussion as to when the next work session will be.
how much time we'll need, yes.
Great, okay. All right, anyone in the audience who wishes to speak on this, invite to come on up. We just ask you to introduce yourself. We're going to limit it to 5 minutes. That clock will begin counting down. When you begin speaking, you can use it as a way to gauge the 5 minutes.
Hi there. I've written down a lot of things. This is a lot of good information. Kudos to staff for coming to putting this together. Just a couple of points as I'm listening that I'd like you to all keep in mind. First of all, if you do a tiered tax rate for commercial, it's very negative on a sector of our population that has very little impact to town services, but pays a substantial amount in taxes. And I can tell you from experience, that gets passed on to a customer. So it indirectly does not make the community more affordable. And so similarly, you folks talked about the impact of landlords and them passing it on. It's a similar situation. It also has an impact of potential new businesses having a choice of moving into a town that has a tiered tax rate and one that doesn't. It can go negative quickly. And the only other comment I'll make that this sounds like it's going to be down the road a little bit before anything is implemented, but at the time that, this is just an observation I'm making from the crowd here, at the time that we're onboarding all these school bonds is probably not the best time to raise a sector of our population's taxes. That's just a little editorializing for me. Thank you. Any questions or? Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Florida Mulholland. So I was surprised that you're looking at an across the town, single-family, owner-occupied homestead tax exemption. It had always been to be directed toward the people that were having a hard time and being able to stay here in our town. And frankly, the older people in our town who were being pushed out. They've been here for 50, 60, 70, 40 years. So it doesn't make sense to me to do every single family owner-occupied. We had a bond referendum. The majority voted for $220 million debt. I doubt those voting were that concerned. We went through a lot during that time. We heard from the public. Most people didn't mind what that tax rate was going to be raised. I think we should be looking at an income-based homestead tax exemption. I think that it should be either age or seniors to start with, so that you don't go in, I'm listening to you, and granted, it's the first time you've had this excellent presentation, but hopefully it's not the first time you've ever looked up on your own and researched homestead tax exemptions. I'm assuming everyone has done a lot of homework on this. So rather than try to take it all on, why not focus on our seniors, income eligibility for our seniors? I think when you start getting into what's the value of their property, there are many seniors in this town that live in very small houses, especially if you go down to the south of Route 1, that are very valuable. They don't want to move. They don't want to sell them. They don't appreciate people saying, if you can't afford it, sell it. They want to die in their homes. Those are the people I think that we as a town should value and be committed to keeping in this town. They made this town before any of you were here, as well as me, although a lot of those people have passed away. The enforcement of it is really an interesting issue. For all the reasons you said, where is it going? I mean, as soon as you say the tax bill has to go to the actual property, the people who aren't living there are just going to have it go to the property. So there's that's an interesting issue. But I think, and I agree with Joe, I don't think we should be raising the commercial tax rate. But we have short-term rentals. We don't know how many yet, but we know there are a lot of them. We have student rentals. We have buildings being built now just for student rentals. And Mike will have to answer this because I haven't researched it. So student rentals 9 months, then it's short-term rentals for the summer. These are rental businesses. They don't have our long-term rental people. They don't have our community members in them. And can we make a special tax rate for them? Can we shift the smaller amount of those getting the exemption? So that's going to be a smaller number. But can we shift that to the short-term rentals and the student rentals? I think that I didn't know what was going up on Oak Street, but those people clearly were surprised. And is that what we're going to encourage? So those are a couple of my thoughts. I had a question about the ADU. Right now, are those 11 exempt? They are required to have family members living in them?
They are not.
Ooh. So I saw there were 4 on last week's Zoning Board of Review agenda. So we can build ADUs just to rent them.
Just to provide some clarity, those listed on the presentation, those are only those that receive tax relief related to those ADUs. Is that correct?
That is correct. They've all received certificates of occupancy,
And then once, whatever the year is that they've received that CO, is when we put that first year exemption on the book for year end.
So the actual number of ADUs out there is different than the amount on that.
Correct, because that ordinance went into effect, I can't remember the date, but it was in 2021. So there are plenty of in-laws that have been grandfathered in that aren't part of the exemption.
Yeah.
You would have had to apply. So if someone built an ADU and they didn't apply prior to receiving a permit, they wouldn't be eligible to receive the exemption.
But wasn't the point of the ADUs to make it like it had to be an in-law? It had to be a family member living there?
The law has changed on that. You do not have to be an in-law or a family member any longer. This is all part of the legislature's effort to try to come up with affordable housing, and one of the ways to do that is to allow ADUs to be built that are not restricted to family members. Which, talk about enforcement. How the heck do you enforce that?
And we'll be taking that up on
Mike, that was my
Thursday.
next
Is that correct,
question.
Mike?
I actually attended the zoning board meeting this past week with the ADU. It was a couple that wanted to replace their shed with a two-story, a small ADU, but their argument, which was very compelling, was that they did not have any relatives, they didn't have any children, and they were looking at building this ADU as a plan for them as they were getting older, because they could rent this to somebody who would then live there and, you know, be in proximity to help them with stuff. So, and the zoning board here made the decision that even though they did mention that it had to, you know, that one of the three criterion was that it was a relative, but the zoning board here in South Kingstown decided that it was not fair to discriminate against people that didn't have children, and so these people are going to be able to build their ADU.
Yeah, I didn't mean to go on to a tangent, but the tax exempt ones, they're not limited to affordable rentals. Right? They're just market, they can be market rate above, they can be short term. Right. So is there a way we can change that? Is that our?
I think that's going to be part of a broader discussion on Thursday night when we go through all the new land use law changes and what we can and cannot do. It's complicated.
Thanks. I think the bottom line for me is start small, target an audience of our seniors, income eligible, year-round resident, and also put in that you've had to live here for 5 years, because we've had a lot of people over 65 who've moved here and they've spent $1 million on a house. Again, I don't understand why we would be considering giving them a tax exemption. Thanks.
Thank you, Roberta.
Mike, can we do that? A 5-year residency requirement? Legally.
So there are some towns that have 7-year and 15-year, and I don't know if there are any 5-year out there, but I don't know of a court case that has tested that in terms of whether that's discriminatory, so I'm reluctant to say yes, but we could make that part of a future conversation.
Can you just research that and come back
Yes.
with that? Because I think that's a good point where there are people who lived here a very long time.
Brett Harrington. I agree with Roberta. I think after hearing what we heard tonight, just make it for the elderly, make it income-based, truly income-based, not this is what I'm going to show, and this is what I'm going to hide, okay? And let's help them people out. As far as the rest of this, don't waste any more time. Scrap the idea, because there's nowhere to put it. There's too many. It's all on the residents. We don't have another way to put it. Like Jim was saying, this isn't a good idea. You're going to rob Peter to pay Paul. What are you going to save ultimately? $100, and then all of the administrative stuff that's going to have to go with this? No, scrap it. Keep it the way it is. I say, along the lines of what Deb said, you want to save money, look at the 74 cents of every tax dollar. We all know where that's going, and let's sharpen our pencil and save some money there. And that saves everybody money.
Thank you. All right, anyone else wish to speak? Okay, that's going to bring us to the end. Mike, do we need a motion to adjourn? All right, do I have a motion to adjourn? We got a motion, second, any discussion? All in favor? Aye. All right, this meeting is over. See you next time.